Hello, this is Dr. Audrey Stillerman, Integrative Family Physician and co-founder of THEN, the Center for Collaborative Study of Trauma, Health Equity, and Neurobiology. Welcome to our module on secondary trauma, a challenge for all caregivers. Today, we're going to take a look at what secondary trauma is and steps to minimize secondary trauma and burnout. We're going to explore the science of these topics. I'd like to remind you that you can find additional resources on our THEN website, including our glossary with key terms and concepts, a bibliography of print articles, as well as audio and video links, and some ideas about essential foundation for doing this work, including a content notice and reminder that learning new concepts and thinking about trauma can be dysregulating, as well as tips for caring for ourselves and sharing care with our community. Before we begin, let's remember that trauma is personal for everyone, and that an extensive body of research shows that traumatic experience is at the root of chronic illness, emotional suffering, and health disparities. This lecture includes discussion of trauma that may be disturbing or may reawaken our own personal trauma. So what is secondary trauma? Secondary trauma is the emotional distress we feel when we hear about or witness the traumatic experiences of another person. Secondary trauma can occur at home, at work, and even just living in society. We have some things happening right now that are great examples of what can increase secondary trauma. The world is struggling with the COVID-19 global pandemic and quarantine. Many of us have experienced family separation and death, either in our own families or among families that we know. We've seen graphic media depictions of violence, including videos of police killings. And we as a nation are beginning to reckon with our long and tragic history of structural racism. There's also an ongoing recognition that sexual violence is much higher than we thought. All of these things cause emotional distress for us, even when they're not happening directly to us. There are groups of people who are particularly at risk for secondary trauma, although the general public as a whole is at risk as well. People who are most at risk include first responders like police people, firefighters, and 9/11 workers, all healthcare providers, particularly now during the pandemic, including nurses and doctors, social workers and psychologists, even clerical and support staff and maintenance staff. Teachers and school staff, social service agencies, the clergy are at risk for secondary trauma, as are military staff, reporters, and the media. Hearing the stories of others can trigger our own old memories. Up to 80% of healthcare and human service providers have their own history of trauma. Right now, the confluence of a global pandemic and highly visible police brutality has pushed all of us beyond our limits. Let's take a moment to check in. How are you feeling as we think about and hear about all of the things that we're contending with at this moment? Let's take a minute for self-regulation and engage in a regulatory practice of relaxation through deep breathing. This is just one of many mind-body practices, some that we find even in our just daily life that we can engage in almost anywhere. Take a moment to sit in a comfortable position. Put one hand on your belly and the other hand on your chest. Take a slow, deep breath through your nose and send the air all the way down to your belly. Imagine that you're sending a message to your brain body to let go of stress and be in the moment. When you're ready, breathe out slowly through your nose. You can repeat this as many times as you need to until you're feeling comfortable and regulated. So what kinds of individual and organizational steps can we take to minimize secondary trauma and prevent burnout? First, what do we mean by burnout anyway? What are the symptoms? Burnout occurs when we've sort of lost all of our energy and are at the end of our rope. We may have guilty feelings, feel cynical, want to avoid our work, and feel resentful of those that we're caring for. We may have a sense of anxiety and hopelessness. It may be difficult to sleep. We may have bad dreams or intrusive thoughts. Often we have a sense of failure, not just at work, but at home too, and in our relationships. Burnout is even connected with physical illness, just like trauma. So here are some steps to prevent secondary trauma. First, let's recognize that secondary trauma is real, it's preventable, and it's not a sign of weakness. It is a normal human response to feeling connected to others. We must train all of our staff and managers about secondary trauma and how leaders can both model and encourage self-care and community care of their workers. It's important for us to engage in and offer regular opportunities for peer support, opportunities to debrief or just be with team members after a stressful patient episode, and also in general so that we can develop strong positive relationships that make it easy to care for each other. Reflective practice is an outstanding way to prevent secondary trauma and includes intentional conversations with coworkers or mentors about the patients we are caring for or the situations that we are witnessing. Why is self-care so important? Well, in order to really help our patients, we must invest in ourselves. A burnt out, traumatized, exhausted clinician is no good to anybody. As clinicians, we need a specific plan for self-care to stay regulated, present, and available to our patients and our coworkers. Otherwise, burnout is inevitable. In summary, secondary trauma comes from witnessing the suffering of others. All caregivers are potentially at risk. Up to 80% of human service workers have had their own personal trauma and therefore end up with a double dose of trauma. Regulatory practice and reflective mentoring are essential for health and to avoid burnout. Please explore some of our other resources on self-care and the science to arm yourself to do your best work and be able to optimize and reach your own potential. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time.